Thank you all for shushing yourselves and quieting yourselves as you saw people approaching the podium. It's really great to see the turnout here. Really nice of you all to be out on a beautiful Saturday afternoon. I'm John Murphy. I'm the curator of prints and drawings here at the Loeb Art Center. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to the opening program for Bunmei Kaika, Political Landscape in Early Modern and Modern Japan. It's a stunning exhibition. If you haven't had a chance to see it yet, there will be a reception after the program here where you can enjoy the works on view. And it's my pleasure to introduce the curator of the exhibition. When I arrived at the Loeb a little over 4 years ago, I quickly found out that thanks to the generosity of donors, past and present, the museum has a fascinating collection of some 500 Japanese prints. And I also quickly realized that if we wanted to showcase that collection, we would need some expert help. So enter Monique D'Almeida. Thanks to the support of the Virginia Deknatel Fund, which also supported this gorgeous catalog. I'll give a shout out to that. We were able to bring Monique to Vassar as the Deknatel Curatorial Fellow in Japanese Works on Paper. And she brought much needed expertise to this area of the collection, having most recently served as the Margaret R. Mainwaring Curatorial Fellow in Prints, Drawings, and Photographs at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. So my main job as Monique's supervisor has been trying and usually failing to get Monique to slow down. She hit the ground running, cataloging Japanese prints in the collection. She's successfully proposed acquisitions that fill gaps in the collection and support teaching. She's forged connections with Vassar faculty, staff, and students, participated enthusiastically in class visits. Last spring, she co-curated with our colleague Jess Breyer, An Unfamiliar Place, Modern Landscape in East Asian and Asian American Works on Paper. And on her own initiative, Monique secured a grant to conserve a rare 17th century Japanese folding screen in the collection. And throughout all this, Monique has been a collaborative and enthusiastic colleague whose passion for Japanese prints, as well as Star Trek and the Philadelphia Eagles, is truly infectious. The exhibition, the beautiful catalog, the program today are all the fruits of the Loeb's teamwork, and it's always a collaborative team effort. So from our curatorial colleagues to our installers to our catalog editors, it is a team effort, but it's been guided by Monique's curatorial vision. So we're grateful to you all for being here to celebrate the opening of this stunning exhibition. It's the culmination of Monique's fellowship at the Loeb, a testament to her hard work and curatorial talent. So please join me in welcoming Monique to the stage.
Wow, thank you, John, for the amazing introduction. I'm very touched by the words that you said. And this exhibition, I will start by saying, is basically the culmination of the last 3 years that I've spent here at the Loeb and at Vassar. And I've been so grateful to forge the connections I have with my colleagues at the Loeb and also the broader Vassar College. And I will miss it here. So I would like to say, first I would like to extend my thanks to the lenders. The exhibition and publication are indebted to the lenders of artworks and images that truly enhance this exhibition. And for them, Bunmei Kaika wouldn't be able to truly come to its beautiful fruition. My colleagues, Ron Packus and Dean Rogers at Vassar's Archives and Special Collections Library supported the research for this project and kindly loaned text featured in the exhibition, Edo period prints from the private collections of James K. Kloppenberg, class of 1977, and Geraldine Papa Schechter, class of 1959, as well as the late Alan Schechter, and which significantly contributed to the examination of the political subtext of Edo period prints. At Vassar, I'm indebted as well to many faculty members who lent their support to my work, including Pechi Andreeva, Pepe Cho, Surin Cho, Pierre Carlo Tomasi, and whose expertise and enthusiasm really enriched this publication and just minds which I can bounce my wacky ideas off of. Outside of Vassar, I would extend my appreciation to my former master's program advisor, John G. Shostak at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, and my academic colleague and friend, Rachel Quist at Case Western Reserve University, whose knowledge, support, and encouragement, plus late-night text messages, truly helped me traverse any pitfalls. The realization of this book wouldn't be without the credit of Japanese proofing from Harumi Lori, the editorial skills of Kristen Swan, and excellent design by Phil Kosovich, as well as project management from Alex Raz and my colleagues, Mary Kay Lombino, and as well as John Murphy. And I do not want to forget my anonymous peer reviewer who looked at my draft not once, but twice. Thank you very much. I am grateful for the commitment and passion for this project. It is my pleasure to introduce Chelsea Foxwell, our guest speaker, an individual whose research and curatorial endeavors I've greatly admired. I first met Chelsea at the University of Chicago's Kuzushiji Reading Workshop to study early modern Japanese in 2019. Since then, I've truly enjoyed getting to know her over the years. Chelsea Foxwell is the professor of art history, East Asian languages and civilizations, and the college at the University of Chicago, where she also serves as director of the Center for East Asian Studies. She is the author of Making Modern Japanese Painting, Kano Hōgai, and The Search for Images. In 2023, Foxwell also co-curated with Bradley Bailey, Meiji Modern, 50 Years of New Japan, of which there is a companion catalog. And I truly encourage you to look at that catalog. It's a great record of the exhibition and did inform some of the ways that I would gaze at Bunmei Kaika. Let's see. Her current book in progress is provisionally titled Painting Everything, Art in the Public Sphere in Early Modern Japan. Without further ado, I welcome Chelsea Foxwell to the stage.
Thank you so much, Monique, for the introduction, the kind introduction, and thank you to all of you for coming on this nice afternoon. Welcome. And if you haven't seen the exhibition yet, you're really in for a treat. And I would also like to thank Amanda Potter and everyone at Vassar and the Loeb that have organized my visit so carefully and thoughtfully, and further to just really reinforce what's already been said about the excellence of Monique's exhibition. Really, she thought so carefully and thoughtfully about each work and how to arrange them. There are many works that you will recognize from from having seen them before. These are prints, after all, they're multiples, so you can see them in different museums around the world. But Monique really put them together in new ways and also found new things to say about them and notice about them. So congratulations to Monique and the Loeb. So without further ado, I will get started. I'm going to speak for about 45 minutes, and I'll do what I can to do justice to this period, which is the period that I wrote my dissertation on how did art change from the shogunal era to the Meiji era. So This is a picture that we had in the Meiji Modern exhibition that Monique kindly mentioned. It's now in the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, and it shows the so-called black ships, right, that represent, and you could see the flags of the foreign powers. These were the foreign powers that negotiated treaties of trade and diplomacy with Japan in the 1850s and early 1860s. Though that opening of Japan, which you can imagine caused economic and political strain and a lot of debate, and it eventually led to the collapse of the Tokugawa shogunal government. But life goes on, and kabuki goes on, right? And there's this print in the exhibition of the belly of courage and the hand of anxiety, and in that there's women who are, basically everyone is fretting about what to do in this time of change, but there are these two ladies that are like, well, let's go to the theater, right? And, so I started to ask myself kind of what changed and what stayed the same, and how do people and how do artists respond to times of great change? And these questions continue to animate me today. And one of the things that I think is so distinctive about the exhibition Bunmei Kaika is that it simultaneously shows the Edo and the Meiji period. So these are three works that are included in the exhibition. And it shows us the diversity of print media across the late Edo to the Meiji eras, but it also shows us the continuities, the extraordinary continuities and consistency of the woodblock print formula and its uses. And I thought to myself that I couldn't really think of many exhibitions that covered both the Edo period and the Meiji period, and didn't treat one as a preamble or a postlude, but really thought about both of those time periods together. And so I have taken that as an invitation to think about what we can say, really. How do we talk about the history of the Edo to the Meiji periods in prints? In Meiji prints, we see we can witness, and this is also from the exhibition and the catalog, the simultaneous transition of the built environment. So we can see this is Nihonbashi. It was the traditional commercial center of the city, but now there's a white telegraph office in the front, and there are telegraph wires, and there's also a tram that's running on rails, and the people inside are looking through glass windows, right? So we can see that in these prints, they bear witness to the changes in the city, but also we can see that the print medium itself is being used to new ends. So, for example, Kobayashi Kiyochika, who's not included in this exhibition, except for in his war prints, he also did this series of the city of Tokyo. And these are woodblock prints, but I think you can notice that they look different. And some people might say they look more realistic. But what does it really mean to say that something looks more realistic? One of the things that people usually say when they talk about the Meiji transition in art, what happens to woodblock prints in the Meiji period, is they say, well, it got more realistic. But what does that mean, and how is that being achieved? Here in Kiyochika's iconic prints that are still really beloved today, we can notice that the figures are silhouetted, and you can't see the faces or other details of the figures. And Kiyochika discovered that he could create a heightened sense of realism, paradoxically, by hiding some details instead of by showing them. And so if we look at some of his daytime prints, such as this image of the Nipposha newspaper company in its fancy new Western building in the Ginza, we can see that the runner and the jinriksha, that the lady riding the jinriksha, their outlines around their bodies are a lot slighter and less prominent than in traditional ukiyo-e prints, woodblock prints. and Kiyoshika studied watercolor, and he and the printers, because of course, right, these prints had to be carved into wood blocks by a specialist and also printed by another specialist, that together the artist, the carver, the printer, and the publisher did a marvelous job achieving new artistic effects within the existing medium of color woodblock prints. So in this presentation, I'm going to, it basically has 3 parts. I was happy to, when I came to the exhibition, I found that it also has 3 parts, so we have that in common. The first one is going to talk about the traditional social and political functions of color woodblock prints in the Edo period. Then I'll talk about prints in the Meiji period. And then in the last period, I will talk about when woodblock prints are supposed to end at the late Meiji period and why, right? People say, well, they're replaced by photographs, they're replaced by lithographs, they're not commercially viable anymore, and the last hurrah of Japanese woodblock prints is usually described as being around the Meiji Foreign Wars, or the Sino-Japanese War of 1894 to 95 and the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905, but it's really just a little over a decade before the woodblock print medium was revived, not as a commercially viable medium, but as an art medium, and we see that in the Shin Hanga that many of you would also know, of Kawase Hasui and Ito Shinsui and artists that will have to be treated in another exhibition. So those are my sections. And so in thinking about this transition, and I'd like to come to some sorts of conclusions about how we can narrate this Edo to Meiji transition. So I want to share a Japanese poem that inspired me ever since I was writing about my dissertation. I tried to imagine what it would be like to live through an age of profound change. And this ancient poem from the Tales of Ise goes, "Is that not the moon? And is the spring not the spring of a year ago? This body of mine alone remains as it was before." So this poem is talking about the constancy of the narrator's feelings for his beloved, who has unfortunately moved on, but we have a sense of unbalance and disorientation about what is changing. Well, what does it mean to say, is the spring the same spring? Is the moon the same moon, right? These are things that are the same, but in some ways, a spring is both the same spring and a new spring every year. And when we achieve a sort of disorienting change in our lives, we feel like we've also been changed, and we start to get destabilized about whether we're the same person or not. So one lens that scholars have used to try to think about how do we link continuity and change is the city itself. And this topic is apropos for me because I'm currently teaching a seminar for both undergraduate and graduate students called Envisioning Tokyo. And it's in collaboration with Bradley Bailey, who you can see is standing in the collection visit on the right, the curator of Meiji Modern, because he acquired this set of woodblock prints from the 1930s by Koizumi Kishio. So this is when woodblock print was revived as art, and Koizumi was a master carver as well as an artist. So he carved and printed all these amazing designs of a very different modern-looking Tokyo in the 1930s. And so in this course, I took the students that you see here to Houston, and we got a behind-the-scenes look at planning an exhibition. We visited conservation and visited some private collections in the area, and students are currently crafting an exhibition proposal to think about how they would present an exhibition of the changes of the city of Edo and Tokyo. And we also visited the private collections and museum collections in Chicago too, the same group of students. So I've been seeing a lot of great woodblock prints that are depicting the city of Tokyo. And furthermore, woodblock print was a popular and affordable medium, right? That's one of the things that makes it so special and distinctive compared to so-called high art. And so because of that, it is interested in showing things that are current, right? Not just things that are timeless, but maybe blending things that are current and things that are timeless. So then, without further ado, I'll launch into the first section of talking about the Edo period. So these are illustrated woodblock printed books by Hishikawa Moronobu. And it was said that he was the first artist who really made the pictures as attractive as the text. So in those days, there was a growing commercial print medium and market, and people were quite literate, and so you had demand for all sorts of guidebooks to the cities and popular stories like you see here. Combining text and illustrations on the same page was relatively easy because they weren't using movable type. They knew about movable type, but it was impractical to use it. And so they would carve all the text. A carver would carve all the text into a wood block, and then it could be printed, so you could combine the pictures and the text in innovative ways. And here is an image by Hokusai of a book and print shop in Edo. Because of their connection with popular literature, the kabuki theater, and guidebooks, woodblock prints were close to the people, plentiful and affordable, and you could just browse. So when we look at a lot of the prints that have very eye-catching compositions, we also imagine prints that were designed to, kind of leap out at people and make them want to buy them, right? So they were multiple, they were affordable, and they were commercial. Hishikawa Moronobu and his studio also painted very expensive, elegant color images on silk of beauties and the pleasure quarters and other subjects for high-class patrons. So it was worth noting that the same artists then were designing works for different price points, different sectors of the society. And also that fashion, which is also something that we know is time sensitive, we want to stay up to date, au courant. So prints were a place in society where the cultures and fashions of different groups of people could be integrated. And when you go into Meiji Modern, I'm so used to promoting Meiji Modern, into Bunmei Kaika exhibition, take a look at all the different types of people that you see together in the prints. And at first, color woodblock prints mainly showed actors and beauties, but as print artists came to incorporate more complicated spatial architecture, landscape prints started to develop. This is by Utagawa Toyoharu, the founder of the famous Utagawa school that Hiroshige, who's in the exhibition, would become a part of. But you may be noticing that one thing makes this print look quite different from the prints of Hiroshige or Hokusai, and that is the color palette, right? So we talk about how the advent of a lab-synthesized Prussian blue or Berlin blue, like you see in the Hokusai print on the right, really enabled the landscape, so-called landscape revolution or landscape depictions to take off in the woodblock print medium. And so instead of just focusing on close-up figures or on illustrations, artists could design these wonderful views of the city where the sky and the water could both be blue. And this is Hokusai's image with blue outlines from the Metropolitan Museum of Nihonbashi, and that is the same subject that we see in the Bunmei Kaika exhibition. So here's the Nihonbashi in the Meiji period, quite different. You'll notice that here the sky is red, because in the Meiji period, red dyes experienced a series of innovations, and that more red dyes were imported. And so here, I guess it is a brilliant sunset red sky, but we've just come out of the Lunar New Year, and we know that red is a very festive and celebratory culture, right? So we can see in these prints the sense of celebration. It's not just Nihonbashi, but it is the true view of Nihonbashi and the new view of a new and modern Nihonbashi. And in Hiroshige's, in Hokusai's image, we can also see Nihonbashi and all of these delivery people and travelers and local people are crowded on the bridge, and you can see that linear perspective is being used to show the waterway with boats conveying the stock, and then these white storehouses to store all the deliveries. So another point that I would like to make is that woodblock prints were always deeply connected to illustrated books, right? We saw that with the very beginning of woodblock prints. And the market for guidebooks just continued to grow throughout the Edo period. And this is the most famous guidebook that everyone turns to when they want to learn about the city of Edo, the illustrated guide to famous places of Edo, Edo Meisho Zue. And in this exhibition, Bunmei Kaika talks about the social and political landscape that we see of Edo in the prints. We can see that quite clearly from the moment we open the volume 1 of this multi-book series. We open it up and we see the rising sun over this incredible panorama of the city with just the tiny neighborhoods. And so at that time, obviously, they didn't have drone photography or any photography, right? And they didn't have, airplanes, and so Hiroshige is presenting us a view that we can see today, from a skyscraper, but would have been, so breathtaking to them. And immediately he shows us not just any day, but New Year's Day, and the daimyo lords who are coming to pay their New Year's greetings to the shogun, right, at Edo Castle. So we can really think about this in concert with the Bunmei Kaika exhibition, because in that exhibition we saw that prints are made for ordinary people, but these prints are designed in many ways to uphold the social order of Japan under the rule of the shoguns. So let's flip a few more pages into this book and see what we find. And there's a great book on these illustrated guidebooks by Robert Gorey called Printing Landmarks, so I would refer you to that. So we keep going, and the next page, page 4, or page opening 4, is actually a list of the different bridges in Japan, and that there's one bridge, the 8 Views Bridge, or Ikokubashi, where you can see all the other bridges. And so there's also a sense of pride in the public works of the city of Edo, and in these books we can see an emphasis on completeness and accuracy and visibility, local lore. As we keep going, then we see Nihonbashi, right? This is where in the Meiji period they would build the telegraph office. And there is a poem in Chinese or literary Sinitic that's celebrating the area. And then as we continue to flip, we get the Nihonbashi fish market. So Nihonbashi was the commercial heartland, and it was also the site of the fish market. And the other commercial places where you would buy things. As we zoom in even further, we can see an abundance of goods and all sorts of people who are out to buy them. And if you look really closely at this book, it's remarkable how many different types of people that you can see. And there is a sense of careful observation of different kinds of people. So here there is a kind of an aged samurai with wrinkles, and he's walking along, and samurai retinue, and a traveling entertainer with her apprentice and her trainees. And there's also a pharmacist, because here we're in the pharmacist district, and a cart puller. So we see all these different types of people, and then we see that in these images, samurai tend to dominate space. They have a kind of cushion around them a lot of the times. And so we understand that this is a diverse society, but that also it is one that has its hierarchies, and the artists are careful to kind of observe this in their images. In book one, the next picture shows the Mitsui kimono store, a clothing store, the forerunner of today's modern department stores and businesses. And here too, there's a poem. Let's make it the pinnacle of our New Year's viewing experience, the peerless Fuji. I think this is Dr. Carpenter's translation, if I'm not mistaken. But this image would later be reprised by Hiroshige in his image from the 100 Views of Edo. And we can see that linear perspective, the plunging view of the street, is culminating in Mount Fuji, who's crowning the city as if with its beneficent aura, right? And so if we understand that people at the time felt that Mount Fuji was godly and in the kind of home of gods, here we have, in the book, we have God and Edo Castle over here and shopping. And in Hiroshige's picture, we just have God and shopping. Actually, he wasn't being cheeky, but he was probably leaving the official castle in this print kind of under a veil of clouds, which was a polite thing to do. And we can see this same triumvirate, actually, or anyway, we can see how Mount Fuji and Edo Castle are hovering beneficently over the images of everyday life in the Bunmei Kaika exhibition. So woodblock prints were in dialogue with a lot of the individual prints that we see. And in both of them, we get a sense of the artists really adhering to the expected, the promoted worldview of the government in this authoritarian shogunal Japan. So another book that I want to introduce you to is by Hiroshige. It's the Souvenirs of Famous Places in Edo, Ehon Edo Miyage, and it's from 1850, sorry. And it also shows us some woodblock prints on the side of beauties and actors. And the preface is really interesting. It says that there was a book just like this that was made 100 years ago, but that it actually burned down. It was by Shigenaga and Harunobu, great woodblock prints. But unfortunately, the blocks were all turned to ashes. And so the publisher, Kinkodo, has engaged Hiroshige to revive that book, and it says they will be a valuable present to take to distant lands or even to foreign countries, and it is interesting to compare the modern with the old. So sometimes we like to think that the consciousness of modernity begins after the shogunal era and the Meiji period, but here we can see that, in fact, the Meiji period, in the Edo period, people had a rich sense of historicity. So as we open this book, what do we see? Oh, it's Mount Fuji and Edo Castle and the prosperous city with its wonderful bridges, right? That they said that the city of Edo is a city of water. So this book was made in 1850, just a few years before Hiroshige's landmark 100 Views of Edo. But something big came in between this book and the series that you can see in the exhibition. And that was the great Ansei earthquake and fire, the devastating fires. So this earthquake occurred in 1855, and it decimated a lot of the city of Edo. And if you're interested, I encourage you to turn to NHK World, the Japanese public broadcasting channel, for a fascinating 30-minute program about Hiroshige's series and how scholars for a couple of decades now have been putting together research that talks about the myriad ways in which Hiroshige's series presents an idealized Edo that has recovered from the ravages of fire, even though it was in fact begun just a year after. I realize there's a problem here. This says 1854, and it was 1855. I'll check it later. So, in fact, this perspective has helped me to solve some things that I had been wondering about. So this print shows Surugadai, which was a neighborhood that was reconstructed after the fire, but it was the neighborhood where the Hatamoto lived, and they were the samurai retainers to the Tokugawa shogunate. And Hiroshige was affiliated with this class as well. So on the other hand, the carp streamer for Boys' Day was typically shown in commoner households, because the warrior households, like the ones that lived in Surugadai, would display armor to pray for the health and success of their boys. But here, the fish looks as if it's leaping out of Suidobashi, which was a waterway that was constructed in order to convey fresh drinking water to the different parts of Edo, which were below sea level and had a lot of brackish water. And so it looks as if this carp is leaping out of the waterway and leaping right over Mount Fuji and over this neighborhood. So this neighborhood had recently been reconstructed after a fire, and so it's appropriate to have all this watery imagery that is maybe acting like a talisman to protect. There's other images. So this is kind of like today. We have a clear morning after snow. There's still snow on the ground, but it feels, pleasantly warm and sunny. And this is also from the 100 Views of Edo. So we can also see this print as a celebration of the prosperity of the city. The same Nihonbashi area, that's the heartland of the city. And we can actually read it as a whole architecture of social stability and prosperity, according to the officially sanctioned views, where you have the markets, the workers who are unloading the boats and the waterways, the bridges, the storehouses, Edo Castle, the New Year's sunrise or the winter sunrise, and Mount Fuji, right? So it's all amplifying these messages that we're getting from the other media about the success and prosperity of the city. So are there any prints then, we might ask, that stray from this officially sanctified narrative? So this is a kind of question that I'm interested in exploring. Students are also interested. And I started looking, and what I found was not exactly a social critique, but definitely a great degree of sensitivity on the part of especially Hiroshige. So in this print, we can see it's early morning. These travelers are starting out on the Tokaido Road, which is also a feature of the exhibition. And we can see a man who's all covered up. His head is covered by his hat. He's wearing indigo clothing, and the groomsmen that are going along, one of them is wrapped in a rush mat because it's obviously cold, chilly in the early morning. But of course, here this guy's on the horse, and this guy is in the sedan chair, right? And I think these would have been comparatively wealthy commoners who were able to ride in these. And he wears these indigo cotton clothing in accordance with sumptuary laws that didn't allow commoners to wear silks, and we can see that actually all of the people in the image are unified by their use of this indigo clothing, and so we get this strong sense of how Hiroshige is empathizing with the different types of people in this print, both the riders that are in these expensive but uncomfortable conveyances, and the workers who are setting off at dawn. And I tried to look to see what different Japanese scholars have written about the Tokaido series, and I found a scholar, an art historian, Takahashi Seiichiro, who commented in 1955 that Hiroshige's travel series were, quote, suffused with expressions of the poverty of society in that time. It's subtle, but in this small traveling party, visually united by the ubiquity of rough indigo cloth, everyone's age, station, and mood is legible or inferable. So in the exhibition, also, if you read the labels, they help us to kind of sort out the different backgrounds of these different people. One of the images that I became fascinated with that Hiroshige did several times is the image of farmers burning the chaff in their fields on cold evenings. So they're burning the chaff, and this guy here must have been doing heavy labor, and because he's not very clothed, but he's warming his backside against this fire here. And there are these unrelated people of a monk and a woman traveler with a baby. And so we get this image of different people who had come together momentarily around, as either passing by or around this fire. I think this monk was trying to light his pipe. So we find other images in Hiroshige where you have travelers who are lighting their pipes on the fire that are burning the chaff in the fields. And this looks like maybe it's a farmer who's sharing a light with the merchant traveler on the horse. And this guy's bending down here, and his bottom is kind of being tickled by the horse's rear end, the horse's tail, and the horse is also kind of, taking a break for a moment. And so this print has a playful attitude, and it's bringing together just this momentary connections between different people. Here's some details. You can see this light along one of the few pleasures along a rough road, being able to maybe stop for a minute and say, "Hey, can I get a light?" to the local farmer. And we see it a third time in Hiroshige's horizontal Tokaido of Shono. And this time, we know that this monk, he's continuing on his way, but he's already got his light, right? He's smoking his pipe and he's walking away, and these guys are warming themselves by the fire. And so it seems that what Hiroshige was interested in was, maybe we wouldn't call it social critique, but he was interested in the small interactions between representatives of different social constituencies. And he reprised them throughout his career. And so another really interesting example is this print. The more I thought about this, the more that I could see it in Hiroshige's travel series really widely. Signs not of hardship or conflict per se, but these juxtapositions or adjacencies that show the fabric of society as an economic force field. In this print from the Kiso Mountain Road series, Kiso Kaido, Hiroshige depicts an exquisite autumn sunset on the plains with Mount Asama in the distance. And this becomes the background for an ironic encounter between two groups of pilgrims representing two different affiliations. So at right, a monk is on the road raising funds for the construction of a new main hall of his temple. And on the left, there is a poor family of pilgrims with a baby and a boy, and they're all wearing matching pilgrim jackets. And the boy is holding a ladle here, when that was what he would stretch out to get donations, because these types of pilgrims would just live day by day, and they would fund their journey, their pilgrimage, by collecting donations. And they traveled with few possessions, and they were prepared to sleep out into the open if necessary, or to beg lodging and donations from passersby. So these are two parties whose travels are both underwritten by Buddhist faith, but they realize that they're kind of in competition for donations. And so the mother over here is kind of staring down the monk, and the father kind of like coughs nervously and looks out at us, kind of like, And so it's just interesting that Hiroshige has this kind of social vision, and I encourage you to look at his prints and see if you can find that. Not just the top-down vision, but a kind of bottom-up vision. And so previously, actually, I had a student who came to me after class and said, "Did Hiroshige read Marx?" And so, actually, of course he didn't, but I actually thought about it. And what I caught on to in that student, who obviously did read Marx, was this idea of what Marx says, that people make their livelihood together, and they enter into certain necessary involuntary relations with each other. And that this is related to the structure of society. And so it's their social life. He says it's not men's consciousness which determines their life. On the contrary, it is their social life which determines their consciousness. So that people are all, very important to each other and to their experience, and that they, their work, their lives, kind of force them to be in these relations that they didn't really choose, but with each other. So here I'd like to leave the Edo period and go into the Meiji period to talk about what we see here. So in these prints, we see impressive new architecture and conveyances and the hustle and bustle of the city. We don't see, I don't know, it's maybe a question, what kind of social relations do we see in these prints, if any? Are people here just props to showcase the novel elements of the city? Well, one place that we can look is in this concept of the openness of the Meiji period. And I won't read this, but when the Meiji period was founded, people were promised that they were finally going to have some say in the government, and that matters would be decided by open discussion, and that knowledge will be sought throughout the world. And so for the first time, the government sanctioned this idea that people should see art, regardless of their social station. They should have access to a way to better themselves and to choose the profession of their calling instead of simply joining in the profession, continuing on the profession of their family members. And in the Meiji period, then, we also, this idea of knowledge being sought throughout the world, Kaika means openness, right? Bunmei means enlightenment, and Kaika means openness. So we see that newspapers are now giving the news, which was forbidden during the Edo period, and that newspapers are being celebrated even within the old medium of woodblock prints. They're celebrating the newspapers in new mediums. And so throughout the Meiji period, we also start to get other types of changes that are not related to maybe just the medium or the artistic style. We see changes in people's subjectivities, and especially in the roles that are envisioned and sanctioned for women, right? So that women were readers of illustrated magazines, which figured them in the active roles of falling in love, of being nurses at a military hospital, and choosing their own way forward in life. And with them, the artistic styles also changed. All right. So in the interest of time, I'll move to my third and final section to talk about some of the Sino-Japanese and Russo-Japanese war prints that we see in the exhibition. I was particularly interested to see this print by Yasuda Yukihiko because he went on to be a Nihonga painter in traditional media, but we can see that he has done an amazing job minutely depicting from his imagination this attack at Port Arthur by the Imperial Japanese fleet for the Russo-Japanese War. And so once again, in these prints, we can see that one of the things that gives them realism and immediacy was actually concealing the faces of the figures and showing them in shadow. Indeed, many of the Japanese battle offensives did occur at night, right, under the cover of darkness. And the artists were back in Japan, and they read about this in telegrams or in the newspapers, and they had to use their imaginations to kind of draw them. And so they often show these dark scenes like the ones we can see in the exhibition now, illuminated by explosions. So the woodblock print is an old technology, but it's being used here to show Japan's new technologies for waging war. And it does so with a combination of old and new pictorial means. So people often say that the Sino-Japanese War and Russo-Japanese War were the last hurrah for woodblock prints as a commercially viable medium. And this was, of course, because they were being replaced by photography and color lithography. So in 1895, right after the war was concluded, the photographer Ogawa Kazumasa attained the ability to produce half-tone photographs, which is where you use a dot matrix to show all the grayscale of a photograph, and it could be printed on regular paper. It didn't need special quality paper. And so this is still the technique that we encounter today in affordable illustrations. And so you can see a photograph in collotype, a much more expensive reproductive means that was not suited for kind of everyday affordable publications. And then below, the halftone photographs that were used. So these are photographs of the Sino-Japanese War of 1895. But at the time that these prints of the war were selling, the Sino-Japanese War, like the print on the left, people couldn't see the photographs of the war for the reason that the photographers were still at the front, and they had no way of getting their negatives back until the war was over. And at this time, they were using heavy glass negatives. So for example, the photographer Kame Koreaki, who was a member of he was the son of a daimyo, and he self-funded his trip to be embedded in the Japanese army, and he brought at least 11 people with him to carry his photography equipment. So, they're using large cameras and, actually 20, here I said 20 people, and his baggage is estimated to have exceeded 2,000 pounds. And so this is Dallmeyer, his camera with a Dallmeyer lens that was imported from Germany, where he had studied abroad. So there were 4 photographers that were embedded with the army, and there were also some visual artists and journalists, but they weren't able to send the photos that they captured or the sketches that they captured back to Japan until the end of the war. So instead, you had these woodblock print artists who were making these images and selling them just based on the news reportage of what was going on, a very brief discussion, and they were not at the front, and they used their imaginations. And so you can see the contrast between the very, very vivid woodblock print imagery and, of course, the images that the photographers could capture, right? So these are battles, and you can see the smoke is just on the horizon, very, very small, right? And these were published after the war was over in a big bilingual photography book. So here the caption has to tell us that there are Qing troops up there in that tiny ridge of the field. And so we also see in this book a lot of images of posed images as well as training drills. And when the war was going on, there was an advertised shashin gaho, or photographic pictorial, and it was published during the war. But when you opened it up, you had standard tourist stock photographs of the Great Wall or of children in Korea or of field drills, because the book couldn't actually be illustrated with actual photography. And so it gives you a sense of what the media could and couldn't do at this time period, as well as, even though these cameras had a fraction of a second exposure times, and they were able to capture a lot, you could still get blurring. You still needed to find a stable ground where you could put a tripod that was going to support a very, very heavy camera. And so some photographs were then staged. So there is a photograph of the Japanese humane treatment of political prisoners, as well as this photograph of the Japanese attack on the Qing fortress of Jinzhou. Experts say that this photograph was staged with Japanese soldiers several days after the battle. And when the battle happened, actually, the Japanese troops found the fortress abandoned. And so they were able to just like scale the wall, and they posed it, right? They posed the photograph. So we tend to have this image that print medium, photography is a medium that is realistic, and that the woodblock prints are symbolic or fictional. But I would encourage everyone to kind of revisit those assumptions. And see that there is a type of reality in the most highly constructed woodblock print, and there's also a kind of fiction in some photographs. And so one of the places that really drove this home for me in terms of investigating what was out there in terms of images of the Sino-Japanese War, First Sino-Japanese War in 1894 and 95. And I found this small English language book of the Japan-China War. And at the end of this book, there is an unexplained image of a Chinese play at Port Arthur. Now, Port Arthur was the site of one of the most important, but also one of the most bloody battles of the war. And there is a new study in the Journal of Japanese Studies just published this month about the details around the circumstances where the Japanese strayed from their code of conduct and killed civilians. And so, what are images of the theater doing in a book about the war, and especially in a city where things are very complex? So there was this complex reports about atrocities. And so Kame, the photographer, actually kept a diary which was not published. It was his private diary, and it was only published, in recent decades. And he writes, in the afternoon, we began to attack the coastal defenses, and no sooner had the Second Army received the order than they fiercely proceeded to attack and kill the enemy soldiers that were hiding in the town of Port Arthur. At that time, the actors of the Xian Cha-yuan theater group in central Newtown never ceased their bamboo clappers or hand drums. They avoided harm by solemnly continuing to perform. It is truly fortunate. According to what I've heard, these actors are a troupe that were invited to come over from Tianjin, and there were 2 groups of 50 each that performed together. The actors are youths of 14 or 15, and they dress in costume and perform on stage. They are truly curious looking. And so when we think about this then, we realize that there are staged photos of reality, and there are real photos of the stage. And so it should really oblige us to reevaluate what is live and what is staged in these images, and in our assumptions about depictions. So we tend to have this image that woodblock prints go from less realistic to more realistic, and from a symbolic ideal to a kind of reality. But we should ask, where is the reality and in each of these works? And whether woodblock prints, lithographs, or photographs, whether from the Edo or Meiji periods, these images are complex and open-ended, deserving of careful consideration. We tend to see the woodblock prints as brightly colored, handmade, highly stylized images. And it's easy to assume that their replacement by lithography, and especially photography, were a matter of course. And indeed, these later mediums did have many technological and also financial benefits over the laboriously handmade woodblock prints. In terms of their content, however, in this talk, I've endeavored to show that both Edo and Meiji prints, as well as photographs, are highly constructed representations and really reflections, and that Edo period prints do show a kind of reality, kind of social and political reality, at the same time that they're also consciously constructed and engaged in upholding and producing certain idealized messages. In that, however, I'd emphasize that they're no different than other kinds of images from various places and moments in time. As you go through the galleries at the Bunmei Kaika exhibition, I hope you will enjoy asking yourself what changed for Japanese art across the 19th century and what may have stayed the same, not only in Japanese art, but in our own culture as well. Thank you for your attention. Can we have the lights, please? And now I'd like to invite Monique D'Almeida to the stage, and we can take some questions or thoughts from the audience. Turn it off? Do I have to turn it off? All right, I know that people want to go and actually see the exhibition, but does anyone have questions? Are we going to pass the mic or, yeah?
Thank you. Hi. Oh, sorry. Thank you so much. It was a really interesting lecture. I was just wondering, how did the Japanese government during like Sino-Japanese War and Russo-Japanese War view photography in general? Did they view it as like a good means of like propaganda, or did they sort of like look down upon it in favor of traditional wooden block?
That's a really great question. I would say that from my experience, they treated it as important for preparations for war as well as for war. So one of the things that the Chinese ambassador said to the U.S. when the Japanese when war broke out between the two sides was that Japan has been preparing for this war for some time, and that they kind of sought this war. And indeed, they had already sent trained photographers ahead of them to engage in surveying and even information gathering. And so it seems that their knowledge was surprisingly sophisticated. But in terms of a kind of propaganda, I guess what was important was maybe the legacy, that after the conflict was concluded and the peace treaty was negotiated, there's this very large bilingual book was issued, right? And it's found in many libraries in the US, so we know that it was distributed quite widely. And I think their message was that they wanted to control the message because when the war started, England and maybe some other countries were inclined to actually side with China, and Japan successfully kind of got hold of the narrative, and they used photography, I think. Another question over here in the front.
Thank you for a great talk. In your show, one particularly fascinating print, you mentioned that the image of a Japanese officer rescuing a Chinese child was a very popular trope and had been repeated many, many times. Can you tell me, is this based on a specific story or tale, or how did this evolve?
That's an amazing question. So you're talking about the print that's Captain Higuchi. So it's based off of this, I would say, this true tale that has its own fair share of embellishments attached to it. The story either ranges from the child's parents had abandoned him, where they were hiding, cowering in a different location, and by tropes, there's a number of prints that depict Captain Higuchi and this type of saving figure who is there with the best interest of, in terms of people, in terms of the Chinese civilians. So you can see him standing there in that trope and then charging over the field. And that image is repeated a number of times. There's also another print located in the gallery itself. And it is of a Russian soldier being kicked off of a boat. And it's an anonymous Japanese naval officer. And so that story as well is something that kept on getting circulated. So when you're looking at these news reports, they're of images that people are not able to go to that front, but they kind of become this popular type of imagery that gets disseminated throughout the nation.
That's great. Another question over here?
Hello, thank you very much for today. As an art historian, I'm curious about the influence of the two cultures upon each other, how Japanese art influenced European art towards, they call it Japonism, but I'm also interested in how Western art influenced Japanese art, and particularly in terms of perspective. Up until 1853, when Japan opened up, it seemed like Japanese primarily used diagonal perspective, where everything is along parallel diagonal lines, not the two-point perspective. But I was really surprised by one of the prints that you had from Hiroshige from the 1830s, where it looked like he's using a two-point perspective. And I've seen several prints where they're using, it's not exactly diagonal perspective, but it's like very, very, very deep diagonal perspective. In the films of Yasujiro Ozu, he uses that, like you see people walking away down this very long diagonal perspective. And I'm just wondering if you could give any comment about the influence of Western art on Japanese art.
That's good. You wanna take
Maybe that's a big question, but anyway, sorry. Anything, I'll take anything.
You want me to start and you can jump in? Yeah, that's a great question, and I feel that my own ability to assess is limited by the fact that I can't actually draw in perspective. So, but then, and I understand in photography it's the same way, that photographers will try to compose, their shots so that there are lines that help the eye read the image like perspective. And so I think in the Edo period, kind of in Hiroshige's time, artists had a patchy access to European pictures, right? And they had access to, some engravings, and of course those were copied because they were so rare, right? They were copied and circulated, and so I think a lot of sometimes you will see artists who are trying to use vanishing point perspective, but from our point, they, it's not textbook to a Western, but yet. It's used in such creative ways, like putting Mount Fuji in the spot where the vanishing point is above the shopping street, or things like that. And so they did have access. Also, there were some European drawing books that, like one called the Groot Schilder book, and it was owned by some wealthy patrons. And so some artists were able to see some really detailed European drawing books that were imported from the Dutch, but obviously they were a minority. Yeah. I don't know, do you have anything to add?
Yes. Thank you for your question. I would say that there are also, building off of what Chelsea was mentioning, you can not in this exhibition itself, but there are these amazing interior views that you'll see of kabuki stages and performances, so inside their theaters, and you can have this type of convergent one-point perspective that you'll notice. Also, I would add that when you look at some other prints, there is a connection between Edo and Meiji where you'll see different types of work such as modeling being used. And by modeling, I mean how the form is articulated. So for example, the horse hides and how that rounds. You also see that when you go into the subsequent Meiji rooms, this is applied in terms of the dimensionality of portraits, looking at individuals' faces. And there's a kind of connection in terms of using techniques that are traditional in terms of Japanese media. So using bokashi, which is this gradation without, that's Atsunashi bokashi in terms of gradation without definition, but using bokashi in terms of creating this atmosphere perspective. There is also gofun, which is kind of, you'll see these like white splotches application, and it's used for sea spray. So artists are really kind of interpreting or reinterpreting the medium that they would use in traditional Japanese woodblock printmaking and applying it into the application of Meiji prints and onwards.
I think there's a student right there. There's somebody right there. Sorry.
Thank you so much. My question was about the use of blue dye and how you mentioned the sumptuary laws and how the commoners were forced to use or wear more indigo and cotton. Did the implement of artificial dye then also show the increase of commoners and prints because they were able to more accurately and efficiently reproduce the indigo clothing that they would have worn?
That's such an interesting question. Thank you for that. And actually, the scholar who has written about the import of this dye, Professor Henry Smith, did write about how blue was everywhere in Edo society at the time because of the indigo-dyed cotton cloth that commoners wore. And it's interesting because indigo was a great blue for dyeing cotton, but it couldn't, it wasn't very conveniently applied to coloring pictures, and so and prints, and so. But I certainly, believe that the print would have looked different if the artist wasn't able to show the blue clothing that was true to life, and so. That's an interesting question. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Down in the front.
Hi, you discussed several themes in this presentation. Was there one that you particularly resonated with or that you feel is relevant to our world today?
Oh, that's a great question. I think one question that I got recently from students was, like, we know that these Meiji period, we know that the Meiji period war prints were made at a time when the kind of not just the government, but also intellectuals and voices in society overall were developing like this strong sense of patriotism and nationalism, right? And it's the 19th century. You can't open a textbook without reading about the nation state and nationalism and the populism, and of course the people who were buying these woodblock prints are often described as boys and young men because they're very exciting. They're showing the heroics of the battlefield. And so, students will sometimes ask me, like maybe not with these prints, but in the prints that are made a little bit later, like in the 30s, do we know the artist's position and when on the political events of their day, and when they when they depicted the increasing militarism in Japanese society in the 1930s, for example, do we know like what they thought about that, right? Were they like go militarism, or were they depicting it with a sense of critique and irony? And so, I realize like as when you're, maybe if you're an individual, an artist, a scholar, you have your own thing, and you can't, and oftentimes, I feel like we feel separated from current events until something happens, and then suddenly we can't stay aloof anymore. And so, I don't know, that's a very roundabout way of answering your question, but I think about this, people ask me, do we know what the artist thought about this kind of thing, So, how about you?
I would say that there's also, for example, looking at Tsukioka Yoshitoshi's work, there's a sense amongst artists that they themselves are trying to, make a living in a way, and off of the different publications and works that they would do. Yoshitoshi went through periods of, of poverty, of his students funding his, of assisting him. And so there is that aspect, but there's also the aspect looking in terms of Edo period prints, where you have the lens of the publisher, and the publisher looking in terms of what are the demands of the general public. So in terms of that application to today, it would be thinking about how our news media cycles run, and what are the anticipations that they might have that could kind of feed, the general populace, I would kind of point out. So how is news being circulated? How is it being disseminated? Who's being interviewed for these works, but also the kind of alterations of news. So I would mention looking at Yoshitoshi's print of the death of Murata, and Murata himself was reported in the print to have died, but he did not. He passed away a few months later during the Satsuma Rebellion, and so there's this kind of misinformation of news. Also, there's a print in the gallery where it's this kind of reusing of imagery, I would say, that's representative of today, and that is depicting the Korean incident that happened in the late 1800s, and it was used later on for this Sino-French War. So same image, but attributed to two different artists, and the colophon, so the detail information is both changed. So kind of thinking about in this day and age, how's imagery being recycled, and who is it being recycled to?
Like stock imagery.
Stock
right?
imagery, exactly. So I would say like those are the different kind of continuancies. And when I was thinking about the exhibition title, I included political landscape, and it might seem a little bit heavy-handed to use that as a term. But it's because when you look at our news, we always hear the terminology political climate or what is the political landscape. So it's very literary and also figurative application of what is the political landscape.
Yeah, and I think that people, they see beautiful colors, they see, okay, this is a print of a city, and they move on to the next one. But it's amazing that, through kind of researching and cross-referencing, we've been able to recover kind of all the different layers of meaning that are found within these prints, and kind of maybe get a little bit more of a sense of how people at the time would have seen them. So, yeah.
I actually had two questions, if I may. The first one is probably just a quick yes/no one. I noticed one of the first prints that you had shown about the Meiji, when the Meiji era has started, and it was about sharing artwork with the general public. It actually looked a lot like a French salon, or a painting that I've seen about with a French salon.
Yeah.
Was that on purpose, or did they... or is that something that people usually like to do, how they like to display art from back during that time?
This one, right?
Yes, to the right.
Yes, yeah. So this depicts the interior of a building that's actually covered on my slide, but a real building that existed. And I know the paintings and engravings you're talking about of like European images of the interior of a salon or of an art gallery. And so I don't know whether Hiroshige, the third or second, whoever made this print, if they were able to see those or not. But thank you for bringing that to mind, because I never thought about that. Perhaps he was referring to European images when painting this. So, but this was supposedly kind of what people's very first time going into kind of like an art museum or art gallery type environment that was open to the public, and you can see like a great variety of different types of people in there. Yeah. Forget the second question, or did you want to? Do you remember? Maybe you remember the second. Or?
So the second question actually is related to prints and photos. When Japan started getting into photography, and I started to notice with some of the war setups, were they trying to make it almost look like the print? Because I noticed with with the beach one, where you had the blurred figure in the front, that greatly reminded me almost of the marketplace that you just showed us like a few images beforehand, with the horizontal lines and the tiers almost.
You're a great visual thinker. I really like that. I think I have even found a woodblock print of somebody firing a cannon from the Sino-Japanese War, and the angle of the cannon is almost identical to that in a photograph. But supposedly, right, that the artist who made the print wasn't able to see the photograph because of the timing of it. And so, but people, who study photography always say to me, it's in the air, right? That photographers are looking at pictures, and it structures the way that they frame the picture. So I think, in terms of that landscape horizon, it's possible.
It's not just that. I also actually noticed it with the army one that you had with the soldiers climbing up the wall.
Oh, yeah.
If you... The only difference I noticed between the prints and the photographs was lack of color.
Yeah.
If you were to put say tracing paper over one of the prints and started adding color that you would normally see in one of the older prints, like the blues or the reds to certain areas, I think it almost looked like alike.
That's a really great observation. And it gets at this larger question, which is there national style in photography, right? Are there stylistic differences that, that become trending in particular cultures? Or is photography truly kind of universal? So, yeah. How are we doing on time?
I think we should probably wrap it up so people can enjoy the show. So please join me in thanking Chelsea and Monique one more time.